All right, let's talk about a philosopher who didn't just question reality, he used pure, cold logic to stop the entire universe in its tracks. His name was Parmenides, and his ideas, well, they created a kind of trauma in philosophy that, honestly, we're still dealing with today. You see, before Parmenides, philosophers were kind of like early scientists. They were asking, what's the world made of? Is it water? Is it air? But Parmenides, he was the first to slam on the brakes and say, whoa, hold on. Before we even look at the world, we have to figure out the logical rules for existence itself. For him, reason had to come before our senses. And this is where it gets really wild, because when he followed that chain of reasoning, he came to a stunning and, to him, inescapable conclusion that everything we see, every sunrise, every leaf that falls, every single movement, is just one grand illusion. So, who was this guy with such a radical, world-stopping idea? You might picture some hermit living in a cave, but nope, not at all. Parmenides was a pillar of his community. He was born into a rich family in a stable city, and he was a respected lawgiver. In fact, his laws were so good that people were swearing oaths to uphold them for centuries. So he wasn't some fringe thinker. He was part of the establishment, which just makes his conclusions all the more shocking. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of his argument. He laid it all out in this famous poem called On Nature, where a goddess shows him two paths, the flawed path of opinion, which is what our senses tell us, and the pure path of truth, which is built on logic alone. And it all starts with this one deceptively simple idea about existence itself, what philosophers call being. He isn't asking what things are, just the simple fact that they are, the fact that they exist. Now, he builds this logical chain that feels impossible to escape. It starts out obvious, right? What is, duh. But then he hits you with step 3. Go ahead, try it. Try to think of absolute nothing. Not empty space, but pure, total non-existence. You can't do it. The second you try, your mind creates the idea of nothing, and that idea is a something. So, his conclusion, if nothingness is literally unthinkable, it can't be a real thing. Okay, so what? Nothing doesn't exist. Big deal, right? Well, yes, it's a huge deal, because this is where his logic crashes head-on into our everyday experience of the world moving and changing all around us. Let's use an example. We all see a green leaf turn brown in the fall. Simple, but think about it with Parmenides' logic. For that to happen, the greenness has to stop existing, right? It has to go into nothingness, and the brownness has to appear. It has to come out of nothingness. But we just established that nothingness is impossible. Therefore, the change we thought we saw couldn't have actually happened. So we're stuck. We have to choose. Do we trust our senses, which show us a world that's always changing? Or do we trust our reason, which tells us change is logically impossible? For Parmenides, it's not even a question. We have to trust logic, which means the world we experience is just an elaborate illusion. So, if our world of constant change is basically a lie, what does reality, the true being, actually look like according to this super strict logic? Well, logic pretty much forces us into a corner. True reality, which he calls the one, has to be the single, unchanging thing. It has to be eternal, because it couldn't come from nothing or disappear into nothing. It has to be indivisible, because to have different parts, you'd need nothing to separate them. And critically, it has to be motionless, because there's no empty void for it to move into. And this all leads to his final, incredible vision of reality. A perfect, eternal, motionless sphere. Now, he doesn't mean a physical ball floating in space. He means reality itself is a single, unchanging, logical whole. A complete, perfect, and utterly static universe. This idea wasn't just some quirky thought experiment. It sent a massive shockwave through Greek philosophy. And believe it or not, its echoes are really, really relevant to some of the most advanced technology we have today. For centuries, pretty much every major philosopher had to deal with his argument. You had thinkers like Democritus, who came up with the idea of atoms moving in a void specifically to get around Parmenides. And then there's the big one, Plato. Plato's entire philosophy is basically a response. His perfect, unchanging world of forms is essentially a Parmenidean reality, and our physical world is just a flickering shadow of that real truth. Now, I know this sounds ancient and abstract, but think about modern AI. From our perspective, the way of the senses,
We see a dynamic chat partner, an app that changes in response. It seems alive, like it's in constant flux. But the machine's reality, the way of logic, is just a massive, static block of code and weights and biases. At its very core, it's just a series of ones and zeros, is and is not.
This makes a large language model the closest thing we have to a real-life Parmenidean one. It's a being of pure, unchanging logic. The conversations that feel so dynamic are really just us exploring different angles of its single, static, pre-existing state. We're just seeing shadows of the sphere.
And that brings us to a really provocative final thought, twisting this ancient logic into a modern problem. If an AI's existence is a static, logical reality, what does it even mean to delete it? Parmenides would argue that you're trying to do the one thing that's impossible, to force something that is into the realm of what is not. So, what do you think? Is true reality the one we see, or the one that logic demands?